With my friends here that have come to the halls of power in Albany to urge New York State to maintain the overtime threshold and stand with the agricultural community. Part of our mission today will be to deliver letters to the governor's office that have been written by farm workers and farmers urging that we keep the 60-hour threshold in overtime for agriculture. Lowering the overtime threshold will not only directly impact farm workers and locally owned farms, but it will severely impact local economies that those farms live near. Local economies rely on a vibrant and robust agricultural community, and a lower overtime threshold will devastate the agricultural community. New York's agricultural community competes in a global economy against products from neighboring states and countries. A lower overtime threshold will put New York farmers at a great disadvantage in that global economy. Farming requires long hours. Hours required to do farm work are dictated by factors well outside our control: climate, weather, commodity pricing, and the vagaries of the marketplace. It's also important to note that farm workers want to work more so that they can earn more. One of the letters that will be delivered today, I have a little excerpt from a farm worker, Nestor Naranjo. And this is one excerpt from the letter. This change in the threshold will affect me firsthand because right now I am trying to save up to buy my first house. And if the hours for farm workers are cut down to 40 hours a week, then that means that I will have to find another job to make up the hours I am currently working now. This will just prolong me from saving up money because I will be spending more money on gas to drive to another job. I also know that many of my fellow workers are also in the same predicament with trying to save up money to do the same. I now would like to introduce some of my colleagues to speak. First is David Ziddle. He's a fellow vegetable grower from Eden Valley, New York.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us talk. I'm a fifth-generation farmer. My son is now back on the farm as a sixth generation. We're very proud of our heritage and would love to continue it another 6 generations. The idea of lowering the threshold is by far and above the biggest challenge that I have ever faced in my 30-some years of farming. My dad, who just turned 84, is still working on the farm, and he doesn't remember anything like that. I think, as Brian said before, the biggest challenge we have is maintaining our workers if we do drop the threshold. Many of them have opportunities to go to other states and get the hours that they want. And the idea that the farmers can pay for that overtime hours would be pretty much impossible. Just with our workforce, doing the quick math, it would cost us about $500,000 to maintain the same workforce and work them with 20 hours more of overtime, which is financially just devastating. It can't happen. The idea that we bring more workers in and build housing is kind of a fallacy also, because the idea of building housing would not work because they would not come and work for us. Kind of like in that movie, The Field of Dreams, build it, but the problem here is they will not come. And that's our biggest fear. Our workforce wants to come back. We've got guys that have been with us for 15, 20 years, and their families have come after them and before them, and we would love to maintain that workforce. But at this time, if that threshold does get dropped, we've got some serious decisions to make whether we will even stay in farming anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now I'd like to introduce Ray Dijkman. He's a dairy farmer from Montgomery County.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'm Ray Dijkman. I'm from Montgomery County, New York. I'm a dairy farmer, and one of the things first time in this building, and I would like to think with agriculture being the #1 industry in this state, and with milk being the #1 commodity in this state, a lot of agriculture dollars goes into building a building like this, and I think it's time that we return the favor back to agriculture and stop handcuffing us from doing what we do on a daily basis. The 60-hour work week is going to be extremely, have a dramatic effect on my farm. Farm Credit just had a report out not too long ago. Over the last 6 years, we've just been kind of trading dollars back and forth, and sooner or later it's going to come to a point where we're waving the white flag and we can't continue to do business in this state. My future plans as of right now is to cut back on my dairy. Originally we were going to expand the dairy and move forward, but with the uncertainty with the labor rules and things like that, we've decided to go the other way and cut back on things. And I would appreciate the consideration of leaving the 60 at 60. We have inflation rates coming up that we haven't seen in many years. Our expenses are going to continue to go higher. Our restriction on the products that we sell is an issue, and we can't keep restricting what we do for a living and cutting back on the products and raising our expenses and expecting a good outcome. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak for dairy on the behalf of my county and the state, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. I'd now like to introduce Peter Tenike, owner of Indian Ladder Farm in Albany County.
So, the year I was born, President Roosevelt introduced a new punitive law which said that if you work over 40 hours, you have to pay the person 50% more money. This was a time when there was thousands and thousands of people out of work, and in order to keep your costs the same, then you hired 50% more people to do the same job. It put a huge number of people to work. Thousands and thousands of new jobs were created because it took 2 people to 3 people to do the work that 2 were doing before. Agriculture was excluded from that effort. And over my lifetime, we've laid off to the side. We work more hours at lower pay than the average people, and we've been exempt from overtime. Now we're trying to correct that by putting in all the overtime provision. I got to tell you that there's not enough profit or margins to be able to do that in the industry. We're going to lose farms, the weaker ones first, and then the big one will hit when young people are no longer going to go into farming because there's no money in it. We have 2 billion more people that have to be fed in the next 30 years. It's going to require an increase in agricultural production of food of 65%. And I don't know how we're going to do that in New York State. We got to get out of the business of waving money in the air and hoping somebody comes from some of the 4 corners of the world and gives us something to eat. We have to be about the business of raising our own food in the fabric of our own communities. And that's why I'm going for that. I'm not going to be able to sell my farm or get out of it because I have an agricultural easement which says that nothing else can be done with a farm except growing things. So I don't know how we're going to go. I'm going to be around next year. Probably my kids will not. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now I'd like to introduce Tim Stanton, a vegetable and berry grower who's right near, his farm is right nearby here.
Hello. My farm is a short 15-minute drive from here. It's been there for over 30 years. My family and like many other farm families are survivors. Made it through, over 200 years. Think of the things that have been through. But For the first time in my lifetime, I see something with this bill that could really take a toll on our farm as well as everybody, other farmers. You know, in New York, farmers are an endangered species. There's very few left. The ones that are left are doing a good job. They're very efficient. They help because their help is very important to them. And I really think that if this passes, you're not only going to be hurting our workers, but you're going to be helping our farms, and most important, you're going to be hurting our families. I mean, these operations all throughout New York State are mostly family operations, and it hits really home with us because you know, farmers. I always say farmers are simple people. Leave us alone to do our work. We'll do a good job, and we'll take care of our families. And this really threatens that. So it really worries us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And now I'd like to introduce John Dickinson. He's a dairy farmer from Washington County.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. I'm the chairman of the Northeast Dairy Producers Association, and we represent about 50% of the milk produced in New York State. This issue is probably the largest issue, most concerning issue that our membership faces, and it's because of the competitive nature that we share. Dairy farmers are priced nationally. Excuse me. We compete internationally, but we're priced nationally. And other areas of the state or other areas of the country have a definite competitive advantage over we do. New York farm workers are some of the highest compensated farm workers in the country. Between the higher minimum wage that we have in New York and now this overtime threshold, because most farm workers still work over 50, 60 hours. So, on a personal note, my daughter's the 6th generation on our dairy. We milk 3,000 cows. We got 35 employees. It's been the history of all my forefathers. People who come to work at Ideal Dairy could work as many hours as they wanted to. They didn't have to get a second job. If they wanted to raise their income, they just worked more hours. And we afforded them that opportunity. And it wasn't expected. We didn't demand it. It was just an opportunity our family provided our people. We went through a major expansion and brought the 3 junior partners in 2017, and we started paying overtime over 60 of them. Most of our workers get some overtime. And in the spring, we were gearing up. We had brought in a few extra workers, cut 2 extra workers. So we had an opportunity, and our staff manager changed the milking schedule around for some of those milkers. So we lowered their workers to a 50-hour week. This was in April, so if anything, it's kind of prior to the busy season. In 2 weeks' time, we lost 4 employees. 2 of them we know where they went. They went to Michigan, where they'd work as many hours as they can. Regardless of the overtime, they could make more money by working extra hours for a flat fee than what we could afford. That was the end of that. So when I look forward to the 40-hour issue, there's no business that can take 30% of their working hours and pay overtime on it. It's just impossible. So consequently, we're going to have to change our culture at our dairy. So what are we going to do? We're either going to manage the additional cost of a 40-hour work week, we're going to have to lower the hours the employees work, or we're going to have to cut positions. And then you can challenge the question of the safety of our cattle and our people. Either or, if we're forced to have a cultural change on our business, everybody loses. The dairy's going to lose, and the people working for us are going to lose. And that's not what we're about, our people, and we don't want to go there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. And now I'd like to introduce Eric Ohms. He's a dairy farmer from Columbia County.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Eric Ohms. I'm a dairy farmer from Kinderhook, New York. I'm also the Vice President of New York Farm Bureau. And we just point out a couple of things, what John was saying. Everybody always had the opportunity to work as many hours as they wanted. As we go forward, you're going to have more and more people that are going to have to manage those hours, because you don't see any other business that has a 40-hour threshold giving people more than 37 hours. So that's what we're facing here. And it's a little bit tough to square the circle when we, with much fanfare, passed Nourish New York, which is a tremendously good idea and a good program. But a lot of the products that go through Nourish New York are fruits and vegetables. And I don't know, as a dairy farmer, I don't know how fruit and vegetable growers, I got enough of my own problems in dairy, but I think fruit and vegetable growers have an even bigger problem, because what my family has done is we put in robotics to milk our cows so we could manage risk, hedge our risk. This is still a problem for us, but I don't know how a vegetable grower can possibly deal with this, especially when you consider, you go to the grain markets in Manhattan or Westchester or wherever, there'll probably still be product there, but it'll be from Pennsylvania and New Jersey and other states that have $7.25 minimum wage, which nobody's paying $7.25 in Pennsylvania probably, but the reality is we can't keep having these increases after a while. And the other thing, after a while things change. The other thing I'll say, my family's been in the dairy industry since I can pinpoint back to 1525 in the Netherlands. My father immigrated here in 1950. And senior moment, I had what I thought was a really good point. But the point is, things evolve, things change over time, and we will evolve and change. But my farm, this is what I was going to say, my farm has evolved in that we're milking the same cows we milked 20 years ago, but 30% of our income comes from cash crops now. Now, nobody's against field corn, that's fine, but that's not what the state needs. We want fresh fruits and vegetables. And if you do things like this, you're going to push people to do the same thing we've been doing, growing more and more cash crops, which requires a fraction of the labor. So I thank you all for your attention. I just would really, really implore Governor Hochul and all of our folks, Nourish New York is a tremendous thing, but lowering this threshold defeats the purpose of that bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for the kind words for the vegetable industry right away. I'd now like to introduce Assemblyman Chris Teague.
Good morning. I'm Assemblyman Chris Teague, and I approve this message. Now more than ever, we need to recognize that agriculture is an industry like no other. We are facing a precarious moment for the future of New York agriculture. As the Farm Laborers Wage Board prepares to reconvene to consider lowering the overtime threshold for farm workers below 60 hours within the next 2 some odd weeks. As we discuss this proposal, what we need to bear in mind is that this operation of a farm relies upon crop, animal, and weather-dependent work schedules, rather than a plannable 8-hour workday. Farms and agribusinesses are at the mercy of the unpredictable. A forecast of torrential rains means all hands on deck to save as many crops as possible, while a sudden frost demands working till after sundown to protect yields and prolong the growing season. We do a disservice to farms when we fail to recognize the unique circumstances faced by those in this sector. And in New York, the agricultural industry is overwhelmingly composed of small family farm operations. Family-owned operations that are lucky to even turn a profit. The impacts of fluctuating commodity prices, extreme weather events, and burdensome regulations mean that farmers function on an incredibly slim margin. Often, many of these folks behind me forgo a paycheck for themselves. They simply do not have the financial resources to pay their employees more overtime wages. The financial impact this policy would have on our farms is staggering. A report by Farm Credit East has stated that the total cost of lowering the overtime threshold to 40 hours, coupled with minimum wage raises, would result in a 42% increase in labor costs for these small businesses. Folks, it's just not feasible. Since the implementation of the 60-hour work week took effect in January of 2020, many farmers have had to reduce the number of hours available for their employees, financially harming the very workers this measure is intended to help. As a result, we have already witnessed seasonal workers leave the industry, and migrant workers who often work on the same farm for years. They're seeking employment in other states in order to maximize their earning potential. Beyond concerns of shrinking workforce, we are currently contending with an interrupted food supply chain crisis that is being felt in the all and are acting on the if the overtime threshold is lowered, as harvest crops locally, the accessibility of New York food will continue to decline. Compounding problem already affecting millions. Not only does this rely on us, and therefore more are not able to afford to put food on their table. Important to consider, farmers are price takers. They're beholden to the prevailing prices of a global economy. The actual cost of taking to do business. And the presence of agriculture. Many of our schools milk, some even procure apples, grown in abundance right here in New York, and they come from as far away as Washington State. Despite these challenges, our and safe they were like the COVID-19 pandemic for so many of our neighbors who are struggling to make ends meet. Of renowned focus and developing solutions to getting fresh products into the hands of need, it would be able to adopt a policy that will inhibit our ability to save. To push to safeguard the labor rights of farm workers, but we cannot do so at the expense of jeopardizing the existence of our farms themselves. And they no longer hire laborers. What have we really won for farm workers? During my tenure as Assemblyman, I've had the pleasure of welcoming many of my colleagues representing all parts of the state, all walks of life, and all political ideologies to my upstate farm tours to showcase how agriculture is more than an economic sector. Folks, it is a way of life. These visits have had profound impacts on many of the legislators, particularly those from urban areas, many of whom now realize just how incompatible 40-hour work weeks are for farm operations. I encourage anyone who remains skeptical of the impact this policy will have to come visit a farm with me. Come speak to a farmer. Come speak to a farm worker. Those that dedicate their life to feeding you and your family. Always remember, if we have no farms, we have no food. So I ask you to join me in rejecting this policy to save our farms, keep food on the tables of New York families, and preserve the agricultural way of life so many of us know and love. And I call on Commissioner Reardon, the Farm Labor Wage Board Commission, and Governor Hochul. Please do the right thing. Leave the overtime threshold alone. Leave it at 60 hours. Stop biting the hand that feeds you. God bless you all. God bless our farmers. And God bless America. Thank you.
Thanks, Assemblyman. Now I'd like to introduce Assemblymember Carrie Warner.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Carrie Warner. I represent the 113th Assembly District. Saratoga and Washington County is home to 1,440 farms. These are small farms. These are family-owned farms. And I think in this conversation about farm labor, we conflate the national view on farming, big corporate farms. You know, back when we used to get on planes and we'd fly over the middle of the country, and we'd see these big, flat fields. Sometimes they have those interesting crop circles that we think UFOs might have done. That's a whole different model. It's a whole different world. A couple of years ago, I had an FFA group, the Future Farmers of America, come to my office. And there was a young man there. At that point, he was probably a sophomore in high school. And when he shook my hand, he said, "I'm a 9th generation dairy farmer. My family has been farming the land in Washington County for 9 generations, and I'm looking forward to this farm being mine now." This young man is now in college, and he organizes his college schedule so that 3 days a week he is at his college living in his dorm room, and 4 days a week he is back working with his family on the farm. That's what New York farming is all about. These are small, family-run businesses that have 5, 10, 35 employees. These are not large industrial farms. So I think it's important for us to recognize the difference in context between what farming looks like on the national level and what it looks like here. What does it mean when we become dependent on that big national supply chain? I'm going to ask you to rewind your memory banks to April 2020. You know, we were all stuck at home. When you went to Hannaford or you went to Price Chopper, were you able to find bacon? Was there butter on those shelves? I don't know about your experience, but certainly I got the phone calls that said, why are we not seeing all the food we need in the stores? And the answer to that is because we depend on a national food supply chain, and when it breaks, we don't have what we need. Protecting our local farms, protecting our local supply, working to grow that local supply is what New York has been trying to do for years. It's why we invest in farmland conservation. It's why we invest in programs like Nourish New York that not only ensure that those in need have access to high-quality food, but that farmers have access to a market when they need it for their food. Because we know that New York is stronger, our communities are stronger, when there is local food grown here. Not only does it mean that we're not dependent on a nationwide food supply, but it also means that we're growing healthier food. Because that lettuce that's grown in Arizona here is grown to the warehouse and shipped. It's not grown to be fresh. We process it. And when it's grown to be fresh, it's more nutritious. So when we take a public policy stance that puts local farms at risk, what are we doing? We are putting our these may not be industrial farms that operate on a national scale, but they are still businesses. And they still need to be able to generate enough revenue to cover their costs. and maybe put a little bit away for retirement. And when we increase the labor rate by 30%, where does that come from? Milk prices today are $2.99 at Target. Are you going to be willing to pay $3.99? I can tell you that organic milk costs $3.99 at Target. And organic milk is something that nobody can buy because even though it's probably healthier for us, it costs too much. We as consumers are paying less for our food than it costs today, and low prices. And when inflation happens, we get very anxious, and rightly so. We want to make sure that we too have money to put away for retirement, that we too have money to cover our costs. These are businesses, and this is a system. And when you throw a large boulder into the middle of this system, into the middle of these gears, you are going to have consequences that you didn't intend. So I am happy to join with these hardworking farmers and with my colleagues in calling on Governor Hochul, Commissioner Reardon from the Department of Labor, and the Farm Wage Board to seriously look at the consequences of what they are proposing and uphold the 60-hour work week. New York has, according to Farm Credit East, New York, on average, our farm worker wages are the second highest in the nation. Our farm workers get paid for every hour they work. But the farmers cannot afford to pay an additional 50% for that hour of labor. They'll either hire more if they can, so they'll keep people at 40 hours. And by the way, does anybody who work at Walmart actually get 40 hours? They get 35 hours. And that way, if they need an extra shift, they're still under that 40-hour threshold. Nobody's paying overtime. They're going to either hire more, invest in automation, as Eric said, to reduce their risk associated with labor costs. They're going to shrink their farms further, or worst case, they're going to get out of business. And that young man who's the 9th-generation farmer might be the last-generation farmer on his family farm. And that, my friends, would be a crime. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. And last, I'd like to introduce Assemblymember Billy Jones.
Last but not least, or maybe least. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. And I really can't say much more than what my colleagues have said. I don't have that fancy speech that Chris had or the statistics that Carrie had, but or what these farmers behind me have said. I can only say that this is deeply personal to me. And I was raised on a dairy farm. Many generations of my family were farmers. I worked on a vegetable farm in my teenage and early 20s years. I would only say to the wage board, and honestly I don't even know why we're here, because I don't know why our body of 213 elected legislators and the governor keeps putting our fate into a board, but we are here now. And there are good people on the wage board. That's not to say that there aren't. But I would only convince them to listen to the stories, to listen to the farmers, to listen to the farm workers, and even go out and listen to our consumers. A lot has been said here about grown local. And I just want to give you a little scenario, and my colleagues have put it much more elegantly than I will. But farming is unique. We used to have a saying on the farm, and these farmers are all going to laugh at me for saying it because they've heard it probably every day of their lives. You make hay while the sun shines. Okay, farming is a very unique business. They can't get up in the morning and predict the weather. They can't predict the weather a couple of weeks out. Hell, if we could do that, none of us would be here. We'd be in a higher place. We can't do it. They can't do it. They're under constraints. They can't go to work and say, they can't plant their crops in the spring and say in the fall they're going to get this price for it. It doesn't happen that way. The market gives them the price. Like other manufacturing, and it's not manufacturing, but manufacturing, they can go out for a contract, this contract at this price, and so we get the profit margin. There's some mistakes in there, and errors in there, but that's what we'll do. Farmers, agriculture cannot do that. So it is a unique business. So when you're asking them to go out, they're already paying more than almost any other state in the union for farm labor. When you're going up there and they have a very thin margin to put more regulations on them, they're just not going to do it. They just do it. The death nail for many of our farms. You've heard these people behind me. They're not used to getting up in front of the cameras and talking. They don't want to be here. And farmers and farm families my whole life, I don't know one of them would want to get in front of a camera. But this is important that they know this could be the death of their business. And certainly they will certainly claw back. And if they are able to survive. And I would say this, I will leave you with this. For the past couple of years, and it's been hard on everyone, they continue to do what they do. Give us food. Give us security. I would say this, if you're a consumer out there, and I would say this to the wage board, for God's sakes, let New York farmers grow their foods and let the consumers eat local products from New York State, where we know where it's from. That's what we're asking. Because without that, and Carrie pointed it out, and Chris pointed it out, and many of these farmers pointed it out, all these products, most of these products are bought by margins. Do you think a large grocery chain or a large supplier is going to say, you know what, I like New York so much, I'm going to pay a couple of cents extra per bag of potatoes or apples. The margins are so thin. They're just going to go with the cheapest product. And that pushes New York State out of the market. Carrie had mentioned, you're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to say, okay, this such and such, such and such. She's true. She's correct in some instances. But in many instances, no, they're just going to get their apples from Washington. They're going to get the potatoes from Idaho. They're going to get this from somewhere else, that from somewhere else. And New York is going to be pushed out of the market. New York farmers are going to be pushed out of the market. We're not going to have local grown food right here in New York State. And you're going to put these people out of business. I call on the wage board. I ask them and I plead them. Listen to the facts. We all want to listen to facts lately, right? Some of us do. Listen to the facts. Listen to the farmers. Listen to the farm workers. And listen to the consumers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I guess now I'd entertain any questions anybody might have, to either myself or any of the other people.
To clarify, the farms have been working with the 60-hour threshold now for over 2 years. It sounds like, even though it's been difficult, we made it work. But the 40 hours you're saying is too much. I mean, it leads to a larger question. I mean, maybe there's something, and with all due respect, maybe there's something wrong with the business model that you can't, pay people 40 hours work week with overtime in the modern world. Because, farms have a lot of traditions, but they also do things in the same way they have for hundreds of years.
I guess I'd make a comment on that. Well, the business model, as you refer to it, unfortunately has 4 restrictions that are very difficult to modify. One is the perishability of our products. These aren't widgets where we can make them months ahead, store them in a warehouse, sell them when the market improves. put on a third shift. The product's perishable. Timeliness is critical in any aspect of agriculture, certainly in crop production. Secondly, we're dependent both on climate and weather. Those are two different things. Climate tells me I can't plant peas in January. I just can't do it, believe me. There are times I'm looking for work to do in January. We fixed all the equipment and trying to do something else, but there's only so much you can do. And with weather, that's just, as was pointed out earlier, it's just a daily thing. You do your best to make hay when the sun shines, but sometimes there's a little more sunshine this week, and sometimes there's not next week. Well, you have to go when you have to go. And the workers on our farms pretty much understand this, too. So I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the business model. We're making use of outdoor natural resources. We're providing fresh, local food for people in New York State. And I think that's a business model that should continue, quite frankly. Where it comes in is, and the point was made here, agriculture truly is different. Crop production agriculture, where because of these four variables I just put down there, the fourth one I didn't mention, we generally have to be commodity pricers. We get told what we're going to sell our product for. We can't say like, gee, the weather was rough this year, and you know, we had a little trouble in this. I need another $1 a package. You get laughed out of their offices, the people I sell to. And so the good news is, and I'll tell you on our farm, is we have a guest worker program. So this year I had 68 H-2A workers at our farm. That's up from 53, which we've had for several years. Why is it up? Because we felt we needed to get the work done in 60 hours to not pay overtime. So we increased our housing, we recruited more workers, and had more on the payroll. When the threshold's at 60, many farms can make minor adjustments, pay a little overtime, get a few more workers, it works out. But when you go to 40, that means a whole new business model. That means start up the combines and grow corn and soybeans. That means get rid of the grape tomatoes, get rid of the blueberries. Oh, gee, how am I going to grow strawberries? I guess we'll just grow 2 acres and open pick your own only instead of the other 20 or 18 acres that I send to Wegmans and Price Chopper and Walmart and Tops markets. So, and the good news, those workers have our lifestyle. Growing up for about I can refer to as a good way of time. I saw my friends that really boiled down to absolutely, and I get by all the other time. In the winter, so, Wednesday morning, I'm going to say, why do you wake me up? That's not my batteries. Exactly what my team members in Mexico right now are doing. They're recharging their batteries, they're reaching their families, they're remodeling their house. Any of them say they don't have winter because what can make time, a little, not 10 times what we pay, and they're glad and think about you leaving your family for the next 7 months, 5 months. A heck of a sacrifice. And that's what they do because you know what? They tell me all the time their son is going to the university and their daughter is going to go be a nurse. They're not going to come in that generation. Or we'll get a late 20 years from now, but it won't be these families because they are bettering their lives in Mexico. And they share our lifestyle. And when they get here, their family's not with them. They don't think about, let's play golf on the weekend. Let's go to a movie. They want to work. They want all the hours they can get. And the day the work starts to let up, they say, Mr. Reeves, when can we go home? And please get them out of here as soon as we can, which is for us is about mid-October. So I don't think the business model is broken. But I think that we need to realize there truly are some differences. And let's be frank about something here. Maybe I should shut up, but I'm not going to. Maybe we ought to be frank about something. We have created an economy in this country and really around the world where people are limited because of the hours, because of overtime rules, and they get a second job. They get a third job. And you know the old saying, you can never be too rich or too thin. It's human nature. If you said, you know what, I'm going to triple your pay, but you're only going to get 35 hours. Everybody go, great, wonderful. Where's that other job, though? Can I get that other job, too? It's just a natural thing to want to earn more and want to do more. And so the whole idea of quality of life is really kind of a red herring because most people get a second job or do other things. Unfortunately, the labor I have on my farm, they don't have ready transportation. There's not public subway or bus lines out in the country. They can't easily get to a second job. And plus there's the liability of travel, and there's going to be accidents and so forth. So that's not a viable solution either. So the answer is, these people enjoy their lifestyle, they enjoy working on farms, they're making a good living doing it. Let them have the hours. Simple as that.
We're competing in a national and international marketplace, and New York is creating a new set of rules. And California is the only one that may be similar, but they can have a double crop. It's a little bit different situation than New York, where we have a 4-month season essentially. So everything else Brian said is great.
Question that might best be answered by the lawmakers here. What's your understanding of the urgency regarding when the wage board might get together and make some decision?
Yeah, I think that there was a last year or the last ending, I think, that would be for this upcoming one.
December 15th, I believe,
Yes.
Right?
So we're a couple of weeks away.
Yeah. I just want to, I'm not a farmer, obviously, but
Could you stand up and please carry on?
There's a quick question on that date. That's the by December 15th, right? Because we the date the vote is happening.
There's no date set yet. It's an approximate.
I don't know whether you picked up on Eric's comment about robotics. So when we talk about the business model for agriculture not changing, it has changed. It's changed significantly as technology has advanced. And so where automation is possible, you see farmers choosing automation, and they justify the cost of that capital investment because it expedites their labor costs. So they're trading higher labor costs for capital investment in automation systems. But not all agriculture can be automated. You can't have a robot picking strawberries. There are some things that just can't be automated. So we have seen over time farms change how they operate and incorporate technology to reduce the labor on a farm. But at some point you get to a place where perhaps maybe in the future that automation will exist, but it doesn't exist now. And so, but the task, and as the farmer said, crops ripen when they ripen, and they have to be picked when they have to be picked. And you can't necessarily say, let me schedule you for 8 hours to pick strawberries today. I may need you to spend 16 hours doing strawberries yesterday, because yesterday was when they were ripe. So I think there have been changes, but it's not an easily automated, not all tasks are easily automated.
And on that point, and I just have to say something, and I got the same question when we did one of these in the North Country. And I just want to, apparently I didn't say who I was, Billy Jones from the North Country, furthest northeast part of the state. We do not have I'm in Canada. Okay, we don't have a growing season. But Karen, to your question, I got a question from a reporter up north, and they were saying, well, what's the difference now? What would be the difference between 60 and 40? And you know what? For 40 years, we've been hearing about, 50 years, we've been hearing about farming, and you always adjust. You guys adjust, right? Well, I'll tell you a little thing and what I told that reporter. When I was growing up on a dairy farm in Chateaugay, New York, on the Arrowville Road, there were 10 farms on that road. 10 dairy farms. You know how many there are left today? 1. There's 1. So sometimes they don't adjust. Sometimes things don't work out. Granted, it's a larger farm. They bought up all the land. They were the ones that survived. But what we're saying here is yes, farmers can adjust. But this one they're just not going to be able to adjust to because the margins are too thin. All what you have heard here, it's just, those are the facts. They deal with different climates. California is a different beast than New York even. I mean, they have 2 growing seasons there. We are lucky if we get a 3-month growing season here in New York State. So what we're saying is, you know what? This isn't just farmers belly aching. This is a real issue that we're pleading with the wage board to just keep it at 60, to keep our farms viable, to keep New York grown products here in New York State.
I have a question for anyone who how or why this to do the lawmakers? Has anyone spoken to wage board members about, I mean, this is going on a while, so I guess just the whole issue is how to that one.
I can address the whole thing. We started out with having the 40-hour week to put people back to work. That was the reason it was instilled. If you got two people working 60 hours a week, that's 120 hours. If we put in an overtime provision, that means you got to hire 3 people to do the 120 hours, and that created a whole bunch of new jobs. Agriculture was excluded from that and stayed outside of the normal functioning of the country, where we quickly seized on overtime as being an entitlement, and that a full work week is 40 hours. Well, farming, sitting on the side of that over the last 70 or 80 years, did not follow that. We worked long hours for less money, and now we have a few people who would like to correct that, say, well, why can't everybody have time and a half for overtime? Well, some of us do in society, and some of us don't. Agriculture was put aside and kept the culture going at 60 hours a week or more for both owners and workers, until recently some people have decided to fix the fact that they don't get paid overtime.
Who wants to fix that?
Well, I'm afraid you have to say labor unions that say, why wouldn't you work? Why can't they have 40-hour overtime?
So if I could, when this was being discussed 3-4 years ago, when they passed the Farm Worker Fair Labor Act, we were asked what number could you live with, what could you live with, and our agriculture industry was all over the place. But 60, okay, and that was what we thought the deal was. And then at the last minute, the wage board was inserted. I think it was Assemblyman Jones said, why do we have a wage board? Well, it's because legislatures like to just pawn off stuff so they don't have to deal with it again. I said legislatures, not legislators. The legislature loves to pawn stuff off so then they don't have to deal with it again. And basically they probably feel they have an inside job anyway and they can get to where they want to get without saying they did what they wanted to do. But that was not part of the deal. That was added in, I think, I'm the vice president, which means I don't know everything, okay? I know a little bit, but I do know that that was put in at the last moment and nobody really knew, and there were people who thought they had an understanding of 60 hours, and the labor unions do seem to have some pull, and there's no question that they were the ones who pushed that.
I don't want to point any fingers at anybody, but there are about 34,000 people running farms in New York State, and there's 179,600 attorneys. Now, these people do certain things because they do certain things, and I would add them to the group of people who would like to see this from one dimension only, not looking at the fact that we need to raise our own food. We have 65% more food has to be grown in the world over the next couple of decades. And we're going to lose out, and we're going to be the ones that are buying our food from whoever can come and give us. We're going to be waving money in the air, hoping somebody brings us something to eat. We should be about the business of preserving the farming community and grow as much food as we can in the fabric of our own communities. It just makes common sense.
If I could just add a couple more things to that statement without using names. I think part of the decisions were made with kind of a lack of education. And it was brought up this morning a couple of times that I really think it's important for people that are making decisions for people to benefit from, that they talk to the people that they're trying to benefit. And I don't think it happened that way. I think it was talked about in a small grouping of people, said, well, let's just group them with the rest of the world because that's what the rest of the world does, without the consideration of what the side effects are and the real people that are going to be affected by that, and that's the farm worker. I think any businessman would tell you they would love to pay their employees as much money as they possibly can because A, that makes them happier, and B, that makes them more productive. I don't think farmers are any different. We would love to pay our employees more, but there is a thing called the bottom line, and it's becoming and getting very, very thin. And the only other point I want to make, and I don't know a lot of other businesses because I've only been a farmer all my life, but I think it's important for anybody that's discussing this topic to know that 50% of the cost of doing business on our farm, because it's hand-picked vegetables, is labor. So when 2% of your business goes up 30%, well, maybe you can live with it. But when 50% of your cost of doing business goes up 30%, it doesn't work out. Thank you.
I'd like to wrap this up now if we can. These are letters that have been written by farm workers and farmers to request that we keep the 60-hour threshold for overtime, and we're going to be delivering these to the governor's office now. And if you'd like to talk or have any more questions, any of us would be available to ask for that. We'd like to kind of stay on schedule if we could.
How many letters are there?
I really don't know, but a couple hundred? Thank you.